"What are you doing there, old man?" In the spring of my junior year of high school, I found an old man who was being harassed by students from another school in a park at night. I just called out to him as if I were talking to my father or someone I knew. The three of them looked at me and said, "Forget it, let's go," and they left. 15 years have passed since then, and I never thought that I would meet this old man again like that. My name is Clifford. I'm a 32-year-old office worker. I work for a construction company. My father died in an accident when I was very young, and I lived with my mother. When I entered junior high school, all of a sudden, my mother brings a man whom I didn't know. "He's your father from today." That's how she introduced him. My stepfather was a banker and seemed to have some assets. Just when I thought I could escape from poverty, my stepfather started to treat me like an obstacle. That's right, I'm an obstacle to him. I started to hate coming home, and I became more and more depressed. My grades, which had been reasonably good, took a nosedive, and I enrolled in a high school that was considered a low-ranked school. My test scores were always just barely above the passing mark. After school, I hung out in the streets, got into fights, and I think now that I wasted a lot of time. Then one day, I saw an old man getting harassed by students from another school at a park where I stopped by. At first glance, they seemed to be serious-looking high school students, but it seemed that they were begging this old man for money. I was somewhat annoyed and called out to him, "What are you doing there, old man?" Then, the group of 3 students looked at me and ran away. The old man was in a suit, but he did look like he was coming home from work. He doesn't move, even after they leave. Ah, there are many like him, so you might get duped. I talked to him anyway, and he says in a small voice,
"Oh, thank you."
I thought, just what is up with this old man? But I was curious about him, so I sat down next to him. He was obviously acting strange, and I couldn't leave him alone. But I couldn't find anything to say to him, so I started to tell him about my life. I had never told anyone my story before, but I do so on a whim. After we finished, I asked him, "And what about you?" He told me that he had been laid off and was wondering what he was going to do, even thinking that if he disappeared, the insurance money would be paid and his family would be able to live without him. He also told me that he has a daughter the same age as mine. The moment I heard that, I thought, huh? Have you ever imagined what their life will be like after you're gone? Look at me. Do you want this to happen to your daughter? I yelled at him. That's when he looked at me for the first time, and for some reason he thanked me.
"I've got a job I'd like to do."
So I said, "Then why don't you take a chance?" He looked at me again and nodded his head. A few months later, I was killing time at my usual park when someone approached me from behind. It was him.
"Thank you, Clifford. Thanks to you, I've been able to start the job I've always wanted. I remember that I hadn't told you my name at that time,"
he says, and his face looked bright. I didn't understand at the time, but he is a licensed architect, and his dream was to be an architectural designer. But he was forced to join the same company because his parents worked for a big company. That company is where he was laid off. When he was laid off, his parents had already retired, and there was nothing he could do. Now, this old man has joined an architectural firm and started a new path. At that time, I wondered what my dream was, but nothing came to my mind. I didn't go to high school, and I don't know how I will live in the future. But I surely want to get out of this house right now. I don't want to live with that stepfather and my mother who has changed. When I told him that, the old man said,
I could introduce you to a construction worker with company housing, but why don't you finish high school first?
A few days later, however, I had a big fight with my stepfather. What's the matter with you? You dyed your hair, and if you won't even go to school, just quit it. Think of what the neighbors will say. You're really an embarrassment. He was yelling at me so one-sidedly, and so Then, I'll get out. I'll quit this place too. My mother used to be on my side, but now she's on my stepfather's. I don't know if she likes him or she's just trying to make a living, but I don't like it either.
Clifford, listen to your father.
I never thought of him as a father. At first, I was happy to have a father, but that feeling was quickly shattered when he treated me like an obstacle. I ran out of the house and found myself in front of the architectural office where the old man said he worked. After a while, people came out from inside the office, maybe because they had finished their work. The old man noticed me. Can I do the job you were talking about? His eyes widened, but after hearing my story, he contacts the company.
I'll introduce you, but only on the condition that you tell your parents about it. Besides, the nearest company housing is in the next town.
He confirms my intention with these words. My intention is firm. When I told my mother, she gave me a complicated look, but my stepfather said, Get the hell out of here! Get the hell out of school too! You good for nothing! Later that day, the old man said,
Just tell them you're referred to the company by Aaron Jones.
He gives me his business card and sends me on my way. I quit school and started working as a construction worker in a company housing complex in the next town. A few years later, I worked hard at the construction site, but my seniors encouraged me to study in my spare time and get more and more certifications. So now, I have a good salary and my own dream. It's to become an architectural designer. I had received a business card from Aaron Jones, but it had been more than 2 years since I contacted him, thinking that I had finally settled down in my work. However, when I contacted the company number on the card, I was told that Aaron Jones had left the company. No other phone number was listed. I thought of asking the president of the company, but there was no way an ordinary employee like me could get familiar with the president, and we never spoke again. Whenever there is more than enough manpower on site, I go into the office and study a lot of things. A few days ago, a new manager came into the office, but this manager denies my existence.
What is a worker like you doing?
My senior co-workers and supervisors understand me, but this guy?
I heard you're a middle school dropout. Unlike you, I'm from a prestigious university that even an idiot like you knows.
Surely, I know the name of that university, and it must be a great school. But I didn't think anything about it because I wasn't interested in the university. There is a rumor going around that this guy is a relative of the president of the company, and that he had joined the company with his connections After a restructuring at his former workplace, even though I was always being told off by this manager, I was still indebted to the president for hiring me, and I never thought of quitting this company. Sometime later, I was asked to attend a social gathering with a client. However, when I went to the reception hall, my name was left alone for some reason. I was helping at the side and came late. Maybe I am supposed to bring this nameplate to the table by myself? Or is it someone's mistake? As I was looking around, the manager came to me.
Your seat is there. A middle school dropout looks good in the last row. You can be useful sometimes, even if you have a middle school education. You can be an order taker.
He grinned at me. Then, a senior came up to me. Sir, please cut him some slack. Clifford will sit with us at our table. But he said,
You are going to ruin your reputation if you protect a middle school dropout like this.
He laughs at my senior co-worker and drives him away with his hand. I start a talk, not wanting to involve him too. Sir, I understand. It's all right here. Then he turns to me and starts laughing loudly.
You can finally say something decent now, even though you drop out from middle school.
I was annoyed, but I didn't want to make a scene at a social gathering. While I was thinking so, I heard footsteps behind me. The manager turns toward the footsteps and says,
Boss!
I turned around and saw the person who he called boss.
You're Clifford, right?
He looks at me. As I stare at his face, my manager says in a whisper to me,
How does the president of her business partner know you?
At that moment, I finally realized who it was and opened my mouth, ignoring him. Mr. Aaron Jones? Thank you for your help last time. I'm so sorry I didn't get back to you. Yes, this is the man who gave me the job. Aaron Jones has been independent for about 10 years now, and is now designing buildings and shopping malls. He was not at all angry that I couldn't contact him, and said he was glad I was still working at the same company. Then the manager ignored this and said,
This middle school dropout doesn't know his place. He just goes in and out of the office now. Really? A middle school dropout nowadays? Sure, I can believe it. But he can't do his job and he's always dragging me down. He's in charge of orders today, by the way.
Mr. Jones ignored the manager and looked at me, and with a calm expression on his face, he said,
We wouldn't be here today if it weren't for you.
The manager looked at me with a grim look.
What's the meaning of this? A middle school dropout like you can't help the boss.
Mr. Jones laughed.
What's wrong with a middle school diploma? I am indebted to Clifford. You dropped out from a prestigious university, didn't you? You mentioned that before when we were chatting. But you can tell a lot about a person's character and common sense from his or her academic background.
My manager, who was puzzled by Mr. Jones' words, stared at me and started talking.
Why would the boss be indebted to you?
I explained to him, who is obviously in a bad mood. It's not so much that he owes me anything. I just got rid of some bad guys. He looks confused. Mr. Jones says,
That's not all. If it weren't for Clifford, I wouldn't be where I am today. In fact, I might not even be here. Clifford saved my life.
I was a little embarrassed by his words. I am glad that someone like me could be of help to someone else. While I was talking to Mr. Jones, the manager got angry because he didn't like that he was being ignored.
You're just a middle school dropout, but you're acting as if you're my boss. What are you talking about? He's the president of our client. You're not the one he should be talking to.
I couldn't help but say, I'm sorry, but he keeps on going.
Why is a middle school dropout like you in my company? I can't believe you're in the same company with an elite like me. You're useless anyway.
The manager blames me one-sidedly. He smirked when he said that.
But a middle school dropout like you won't have any place to go if you quit my company. It's really miserable to be uneducated, isn't it?
My boss takes this opportunity to make fun of me for being a middle school dropout. I was trying to bear it, but he looked at Mr. Jones and tapped me on the shoulder.
I wonder why our boss hired such a poor dropout. A middle school dropout like him is a waste of money.
At that moment, my anger exploded. After all, it was Mr. Jones who introduced me to this company. The way he said it sounded like he was making fun of Mr. Jones too. Sir, it was Mr. Jones who introduced me to this company. He introduced me to a company where a middle school dropout like me can work regardless of my academic background. It is true that I am a middle school dropout, but I am doing my job well. I have been working hard all my life because I don't want to disgrace the president who hired me and Mr. Jones who introduced me to this company. But my manager doesn't stop.
Even so, a middle school dropout working hard can't compete with the elites.
I bite my lip. Just then, Mr. Jones interrupted me.
I heard from your president that Clifford is doing very well. He says he's been a great help. I did not contact Clifford directly because I did not want to disturb him, but I often had a chance to talk with the president, so I asked him how Clifford was doing. It seems that the president is now relying more on Clifford than you, the manager.
I was glad to hear that. My boss's face turns red and he yells at me.
You're a middle school dropout. Are you kidding me?
I said back, my education may be like that, but I've been in this business longer than you, who recently got a new job just because of your connections. And I am certified, but you are not. And I heard that you failed the certification test the other day. Mr. Jones was surprised when I said that.
The certification exam? I'm sorry to hear that.
Mr. Jones laughed and the manager's face turned red. Then a senior colleague who had just been chased away by the manager came up to him. You should leave it at that, sir. The reason why you got into our company, even though you came from a completely different industry, is because you're a relative of the boss, isn't it? You shouldn't disgrace the boss too much. I nodded my head, and my manager glared at me. He doesn't want to think that he can do his job better than me, a middle school dropout, right? If anything, he's the one who interferes with my work. But I would appreciate it if he would be less intrusive from now on. Mr. Jones laughed and said,
I'll report this to the president of your company too. He seemed to regret making you a manager at the request of your relatives.
The manager turned pale. But just then, our president came in. Mr. Jones told him what had just happened. I knew it. Being a manager was too heavy of a burden for you. You'll have to start over as an ordinary employee. The manager was crying, but the president coldly brushes his hand away. Later, The manager is really demoted to irregular employee. People around him look at him coldly. Even so, he said to me,
A middle school dropout like you should quit your job.
and I said back to him, "Yes, sir. Thank you for everything you've done for me."
What?
The manager looked blank. But after the get-together party, Mr. Jones asked me if I could work at his company. The following month, I went back to my hometown, visited Mr. Jones' office, and became an official employee there. After that, I heard from a senior colleague that our former manager was not good at his job and was ostracized by everyone around him, and that he finally quit the company because he couldn't stand it anymore. The boss told me that he was a laughingstock even among his relatives. Then I came back to my parents' house. There was a vacant lot where our house used to be. My mother, who had been in touch with me occasionally, told me that the bank where my father-in-law worked had fallen into financial difficulties and had finally been restructured. After that, my stepfather started to hurt my mother, and they divorced. My mother received alimony for the domestic violence and a share of the property, and is now living in an apartment nearby. I remember the kind mother I used to have and asked her to come back and live with me. My mother said that she had no right to do so, even if it was just for her living, because she had put me through so much hardship. But I insisted, and now we are back to our old life together. My work is going well, and now I am in charge of designing a new apartment building. I will do my best to help Mr. Jones from now